Hello, scholars, and welcome back to Lesson 4 of Analyzing Text to Determine Theme. You should see quite a few things that, if you've been with us in our earlier segments, that you have recognized that we've added to as we've gone through this process together. I'm Sherry Blankenship, a 27-year English teacher who absolutely has enjoyed being with you through this process, and boy, have we had some really good thinking that we've done together. In Lesson 1, we looked at a piece of art to use a process to think about how do we understand what's happening in the text, and then use that to think about what universal topics do we see happening. And from there, what evidence do we have that supports those universal topics in order to get to the place where we can make a theme statement. We are also using a short story. In Lesson 2, we added a layer to it of analyzing text to determine theme through a short story, and we've been using The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. It's a really interesting short story, and of course, as always, I've got my short story copy with me. If you'll grab yours, grab a pen or a pencil, and grab a highlighter if you have it, because you may want to mark some things as we go through. So I'll give you a second to get that stuff. Oh, and while you're at it, you might also want to grab your chunking summary that we did in Lesson 2 and then revisited in Lesson 3 if you have that as well. So hopefully you've had a chance to get all of the things that you need. If not, pause the lesson itself and feel free to go get what you need and come back and join us, because I want you to be able to do this thinking work with me today. We're moving to the stage where we're ready to determine a theme statement based on all of the thinking and discussing that we've done around the universal topics we've found inside this short story. And it's really interesting to see how an author can pack an awful lot inside of a very short story. This one isn't even a full 2 pages long, and yet there's a lot going on within the space of this short story. So let's dive in and get ready for Lesson 4 of Analyzing Text to Determine Theme. More than likely, you've been with us for all 3 of the other lessons, and I hope so, and I hope you're starting to feel kind of a community with me, with the way we discuss things together, with the way that we layer on thinking, but also with each other. There are others of you at the same exact time thinking about this same story in the same way. So even if you're not physically in person with one another, you still know there's a community of people who are doing the same kind of thinking process and this thinking work in order to move from comprehension to a universal topic to ultimately a theme statement that can be supported with evidence from the story. So for today's lesson, we're going to move along. Last time we revisited the plot, made sure we had that down, and then we did some buckets around some universal topics. Today we're going to pick up with a bucket, and by the end of today's lesson, we together will create a theme statement that we have found emerging from our study of the text. And in order to do that, we're going to rank some of the evidence that we find. What is the best support for this, and what does that seem to be telling me? So that's what we're going to be working on in Lesson 4. All right, you've seen this. If you're just joining us, then you'll be caught up really soon, or if not, if you feel a little bit confused with what you see happening in Lesson 4, remember you can always revisit Lessons 1 through 3 in order to go all the way through the process with us. But if you've been with us from Lessons 1 through 4, you've seen this exact slide multiple times. I've changed it up just a little bit again today. Same exact words, but you'll notice that change, the word change itself, is much bigger, because at the end of our last segment, I decided that was the bucket I was going to do some more with. We're going to work through the change universal topic as a model together today, and I want you to do the thinking work with me, but then you may choose a completely different bucket to go the rest of the way through in finishing up your analysis of this story and what a theme of this story is. So that's what I'll be working with today, is the universal topic of change as we see it explored in The Story of an Hour. So last time, like I said, we got to universal topic, we got some of our buckets, and then as we look at each bucket, we want to look at evidence that we can drop into our bucket, and we want to think about this question. What does the author seem to be saying through the exploration of this universal topic in the text? So I made the point in lesson 3, in pulling up this particular slide here, that I circled 5 or bolded 5 of the words that I saw really being explored in this short story. Things like change, like relationships, power, death. All of those were things that I saw when I read the story. And I see that there's something having to do with those choices. But then I don't necessarily want to write about the 5, 4, 3. I really might want to look deeply at what is the author saying about one of them. But all of them, if it's a universal topic that's being explored inside of a story, then the author's making some kind of commentary about it. And so just because I choose change doesn't mean that you would need to choose change, that it is the theme of the story. Instead, it's potentially a theme inside of the story. And there are many different themes that you could probably make a case for inside of this one short story, as in most, if not all, literature. So I'm going to be exploring change. Our key question is, what does the author seem to be saying? What's the message about change in this short story? So you've seen this slide as well, but if you'll notice, our boxes of the steps are getting further and further and further bolded and outlined. So we've done step 1. We understand what happens inside of this story. Step 2, what universal topics do we see now that we understand the comprehension level, the comprehension layer of the story? What universal topics do we see the author exploring? We did that last time. That's our buckets. Step 3, we're ready to determine theme. And of course, that involves, what does that evidence seem to be saying to us about the universal topic in order to get to a theme? So we're going all the way through step 4 in lesson 4. Here we go. So now, if you'll come back with me to the buckets, we're going to spend some time back where we left off at the end of lesson 3. At the end of lesson 3, I had my colored buckets, and I told you out of the 5 universal topics that I saw being explored, that if I really wanted to think about several of them, I probably would go back after I did change, and I would look at power. My green bucket is power. My red bucket is relationships. And I would do the exact same process that we started at the end of lesson 4 and carry it all the way through. Then I'd come back around for another bucket and do the same process. I'm going to slide my buckets for these 2 over here out of the way, because I still want to focus in on where we left off last time, which was the universal topic of change. So thinking about change, where we left off, I had begun to take you through what I was seeing, and everywhere I saw change within this story. I had taken some note cards and I had put them into my bucket. And as we finished up lesson 3, the things that I was putting in my bucket were directly from the story. So I said, even if you don't have an actual bucket, you don't have to have a bucket, you could take some colored note cards and sort it by color. When I come back around, maybe I want a completely different color for the evidence that I would pull for relationships or power. But for this one, I want to pull straight from the story everywhere that I see something having to do with change. And we began by looking at where it was in the story, saying this was something that showed us something about change and about Mrs. Mallard. Because remember our prompt, and we'll come back around to that in just a second. But remember, it is that we would take that piece of evidence straight out of the text and we would drop it in our bucket. So my bucket is really full now. I don't know if you can see or not, but it's got a lot of pieces of evidence in it. If you were to look here, every single place that you see yellow, front and back, is the exact same thing that I put on my cards to drop into my buckets. So I actually have found a lot having to do with change, which is not that surprising when you think about it, because if that is one of the major universal topics that I identified as being explored in this story, it kind of makes sense. What do I do with it now, though? Because I can't just say change is a theme in the story of an hour. Because as we know, change is the universal topic. But not all authors are going to say the same exact thing about this topic when they explore it in their story. We would find that Kate Chopin has a very different look at change than most authors that we would see in exploring that in any kind of literature. So what we want to do is get to the point where we can confidently make a theme statement, a sentence, where we say what the message is that she seems to be saying about change. Now, before we go any further, I want to reference the plot that we looked at last time, and I want to make a point that's really important, I think, when we study literature, when we analyze literature, because we're not saying that this is Miss Blankenship's idea of what change, what the message about change and life is. I may find, as I look at the evidence that Kate Chopin has put in this short story, that I completely agree with her. And that I would think that the way she has Mrs. Mallard respond and react to what unfolds in this plot, from Mr. Mallard being presumed killed in a train accident, having her go to her room, and instead of being devastated, she actually starts to have something blossom inside of her, which is, I'm actually feeling free, 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 we see her say. To then, she finally comes out of her room, while her sister has thought that she's completely distraught inside of her room. Of course, we know what's been happening inside of her and inside of that bedroom where she's rested and is locked inside to deal with her grief. Comes out, comes downstairs, and discovers that Mr. Mallard was nowhere near the scene of the accident, that he had not been on that train at all, and he was not killed in the train accident, but is very much alive and unharmed. And then the change we see at the end has to do with the difference in what she thought had happened, what she thought her life might be about to be like, stretching into the future, to the fact that she collapses and dies of a heart condition at the end of the story itself. All of those things have to do with moments of change or thinking about potential change. But I can just tell you that if that were the news I received about someone that I had a deep relationship with, family member of any kind, I don't think my personal reaction would be to go to my room and find welling up inside of me, I'm free, I'm free, I'm really looking hopeful into the future. I would probably be that normal, devastated, in shock, not sure what to think at all reaction. So what happens in the story and what Kate Chopin is actually saying about change probably wouldn't be my personal thought about change. But what we're looking for is the message that the author conveys to us. And the beautiful thing about having a critical thinking mind is that I can get to that even if it doesn't agree with my own personal philosophy, and then I can decide whether I like it, don't like it, can I at least appreciate how she did it and what she does. And the answer to that for me is absolutely yes, because it's a very cleverly written story. So take that into our analysis of what the evidence is showing us. So I'm going to take my things, they're out of my bucket now, and I want to take this evidence and see where it leads me. I don't want to just say that I think she's really saying this about change and make a statement that's not grounded in the evidence. So I'm going to look. If you'll take your story, let's look at some of the pieces. So I'm going to lay out some of my pieces here, and I'm going to see what they begin to tell me. In your story, you'll find these exact same words. So you'll notice that it was he who had been in the newspaper office when the intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. That's in paragraph 2. We also found out in lesson 4 that she didn't hear the story as many other women have heard the same kind of news. And then we have her go to her room. She sat with her head thrown back. I am in paragraph 7. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees were all aquiver with the new spring life. So even there I notice her reaction. She's noticing new life just as she's heard about one ending. That's definitely change. She sat with her head thrown back. Still paragraph 7. Quite motionless, except when a sob came up in her throat and shook her. So she is upset at this news, but what she does with it is what we begin to see. In paragraph 9, we see that even though she's upset, she's not quite sure what to do with what seems to be happening to her. And of course, my blue cards have gotten kind of out of order here. So I'll be looking for what I want to show next as we go through. Just hang with me. The next thing that we see is there was something coming to her in paragraph 9, and she was waiting for it fearfully. She knows it's not a normal reaction to a major event or a major change. She doesn't know what it is exactly or what's coming. And then in paragraph 10, almost everything is highlighted because this is a huge paragraph in our understanding of how she responds to change with what happens in the plot. So she's been trying to figure out what's going on. Reread paragraph 10 that begins with, now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching. Reread that paragraph and see what things you would highlight that have to do with change. I invited you at the end of lesson 3 to do that as well, so you may have already highlighted it. Go back and look at it if it's been a minute since you've looked at it, and then let's talk about what you find in paragraph 10. So the very first thing that I have marked, and you check yourself against it, is she was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will as a little word escaped her slightly parted lips. And the words tell us so much about her response to this change. Free, free, free. Like I said earlier, maybe a little different response than most people would have to this kind of event. And then, hopefully you've also marked what comes almost immediately next, the vacant stare and the look of terror. And to me, this next part is so important. The vacant stare and look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. Thinking about change, she has let the word free, free, free escape from her lips. And she knows that's not a normal reaction to hearing that someone has been killed. But then in the next moment, her response is that look of terror leaves her. Her eyes stayed keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. If I'm thinking about her reaction here, that's going to be really important because change to her seems to involve freedom in this moment. And do I have other pieces of evidence that seem to support that? Well, if I go back and look at even what we've talked about and looked at and put on the table so far, I just think this right here doesn't say her response directly, but it sure does show us a lot. She's just received news. She goes upstairs and she's looking outside of her window. And what does she see? All a quiver with new spring life right outside of her window. To me, that goes with the idea that she sees free, 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 and that it relaxed every inch of her body once she realizes that word freedom is what's coming to her as her response to this change. And then I'm now moving to the second page of the story, and there's even more. Dealing with change. In paragraph 11, at the very end of it, she says, but she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely, and she opened her arms to them in welcome. Are you starting to see a case here about how she's responding to change in the midst of this? I am. Not entirely sure what statement I want to make yet, but I'm using the evidence to help me get there. So let's look just a little bit further. Take just a minute and look at paragraph 12 and 14 and 17. Take just a minute and see what you can mark there that has to do with, and see if there's anything that connects to the line of thinking that we see starting to happen. I'll give you just a minute to do that. So now coming back, hopefully you found a few things too, because I've gathered what I want to share with you that I've found as I've been looking through those paragraphs. And in paragraph 12, I've marked there would be no one to live for during these coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers. That's where I stopped in thinking about continuing to this. Tells me an awful lot about their relationship too. That would definitely be part of my bucket on relationships if I came back around to use the same process. Free, body and soul free, she kept whispering. We've heard that word already. I've added it to it. And she breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. Well, I actually still have 6 to 8 pieces of evidence left that I could use as well, but for now I'm thinking that these are telling me an awful lot. And if I'm ranking my evidence, these are going to be ones that I want to include in my writing. But before I can write about it, I have to know what my statement is. It's time. I said before we weren't going to write a theme statement yet because we weren't ready to write a theme statement yet. But y'all, I'm pretty sure I think I know something that Kate Chopin was trying to convey to us in this short story about the universal topic of change. Help me write it. So thinking about those pieces of evidence that we just put on the table, it's a very tragic event that seems to have happened. And we haven't even gotten to the tragic event that happens at the very end of the story. But what does she seem to be saying Mrs. Mallard is experiencing through change and what's happened in the story that's causing a change. I definitely, in writing my theme statement, I want to make one sentence that kind of encapsulates it all, but then that this evidence would be things I could go back and pick from to use that help me get to that theme statement. So I might write something like this. Change can be positive even if it comes from tragedy. Now I need to try that on for size, because I definitely have the topic itself here mentioned. I'm not so sure I like this word positive. Let's play with that for a second. Maybe not positive. Change can be hopeful. I don't know. I might like that word better. I'm going to keep thinking about it. Even if it comes from tragedy, that part's definitely true, and it's definitely unexpected. Change can be hopeful, even if it comes from tragedy, and is unexpected. I also think I need to include something in here, because I think part of what she's saying to us is that it is not also always a reaction we expect. So my job now would be to take this statement and to revise it until I was fully satisfied with what I see happening and that it reflects the evidence that I have. When we come back together next time, I hope that you will have a polished theme statement as well. Continue to work on it. Think about what evidence you would use to support that, and we'll see you next time.